Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for another Journey on the Fly, the podcast, where we talk about life and fly fishing. I'm excited, as always, to be back in the saddle. We had a break. We had crazy trade show traffic and travel and meetings with the VA and all these different wonderful people and organizations to try to get things rolling for the veterans organization that I work with. Either way, if you want to check that podcast out, just search in our podcast for Mickey Weichert and Cross the Divide. You'll hear, I think, a pretty good description of what goes on when we work with our wonderful men and women who have served this country and are serving this country. And we do that through the great outdoors, through fly fishing and bringing them out and exposing them to a place that exposes them to, well, their creator and his creation, and brings them closer to having a life filled with hope and discovering purpose. So, well, I would just say purpose beyond serving this country, because that is an issue, as many of you may already know. But that's for another podcast. So we are starting, what I'm kind of excited about here is a new series. I'm calling it Fly Fishing Flows. The reason that I chose that is because there has been a lot of titles and acronyms taken from fly fishing. And in order to create a title that represents a series, well, this seems to make the most sense, because there are a lot of ebbs and flows in fly fishing. And in the process of all this, we're going to cover some basics. We're going to cover rods and reels. We're going to talk about lines and leaders, flies, casting, the stream, insects, hydrology, and in many of these, not all of them, it's going to be some guests talking specifically about those. Today, I want to introduce it, and I want to talk just kind of briefly about the history of fly fishing. So, without further ado, let's get at this. So, fly fishing to many of us, and I've said this quote before on here, and I don't know who it's attributed to, but it says, "In the hands of some, it's poetry, and in the hands of some, it's science." For me, because this is a subjective field in some regard, fly fishing is both of those. There's a romance to it, there's a dance to it, there's a art to it, but there's also this intriguing depth of science. There's a beauty to it. There's facts and data to it. And when you find a way to kind of merge those together, then I think you begin to unveil and discover for yourself, and hopefully, as maybe you're a teacher of this, a guide such as myself, where you can reveal that to your students as an instructor. And that is, at least in part, what I attempt to do when I'm taking people out on the stream. So a lot of what you'll be hearing here is information that I've collected over the years from really three sources. One is my own experience, which is, I would say, most people's experience is relatively valid, although should be open to scrutiny. It isn't always objective. Most of the time it is not. Secondly, from the amazing embarrassment of wealth of literature that we have in the fly fishing world, and the speakers and the experience and the data and the experiments that they've executed and bring to the table. And thirdly, it's through my mentorship, through people who are not just older, wiser, more experienced themselves, have been tested and tried in many ways, and have brought me up to different levels, and then sometimes brought me down and humbled me because of things I thought I knew. So fly fishing has some beautiful roots. It's not 100% clear, but we know that somewhere between 100 to 200 AD, there's evidence from Marcus Valerius, who was a Roman author, that fly fishing was a thing. That it's interesting. He was a writer and a poet. Interesting, right? And he had kind of brought some of that out in some of his poetry. And it's kind of beautiful because we see these types of things. And around kind of 100 years after this poem was established, and one of the stanzas reads, "Who has not seen the scarce rise, decoyed and killed by fraudulent flies?" I love that. One more time. Who has not seen the scarus rise, decoyed and killed by fraudulent flies? Man, we could run with that all by itself. Matter of fact, maybe that'll be the title to this podcast. But then we kind of see, we see some things happen in ancient Macedonians. We see a lot of people kind of go back to 1676, where Charles Cotton, who was an English poet and aristocrat, he worked with writer Isaac Walton, and they published one of was called The Complete Angler. And I personally have not read it. I don't own the book. I will one day. I'm kind of excited to look at that. But they had talked about how to catch grayling and how to catch trout in the stream, and they provided these insights and all this kind of cool stuff. And we see it kind of come from English roots. We see it in the States, and we see it in Japan. Japan, we see a lot of the tenkara fishing, although the principle's the same. We're trying to fool these fish with fraudulent flies, right? And that is ultimately the quest of the fly fisherman. It is to take a group of materials, a bent piece of metal, some string of some sort, some feathers or some fur, and nowadays a lot of materials that are synthetics, from rubber and silicone and all kinds of sparkly fun stuff, right? And we're attempting to do two things, I guess: imitate something that is very real in the water, or something that is absolutely doesn't look like anything in the water that just might entice a fish. And we all know that. The mop fly is a great example, though it can be argued in its tan form or its tan color that it represents the larva of a crane fly, and very much so. And if you look right now, especially in a lot of our limestoners, you will see just pollutions of limestone, or crane fly, I'll call them cases, just all over the place. They are completely obvious when you see them stuck to the rocks right now. And if you pop one of those open, and I don't suggest everybody does that, but if you pop one of those open, you will clearly see what looks to be like a tan mop fly living inside of it. But nevertheless, you get my point. And for years, the upper class in England were those that fly fished. And for years after that, unfortunately, fly fishing had that stigma to it, right? But before I get a little further than that, if you listen to my podcast I did about 2 years ago with my friend, archaeologist, we talked briefly about an article, and I'm pretty sure the article's linked in there, that talks about 11,000 years ago, there was a piece of bone that was discovered on the shores of the Jordan River that was cut in the shape of a hook, but within the shape of that hook, it looks like they carved out the image of an insect. So arguably, as archaeology would do, that could be evidence of fly fishing, as I just described it, or rather as Marcus described it, as fraudulent flies, by the ancients 11,000 years ago, trying to trick fish with something on a hook that looks like an insect in the water. So we see a lot of that all over the place. I mean, you have fly fishing museums in the UK, and we have them here in the United States. We've got the American Museum of Fly Fishing. We have all these wonderful places to go see this beautiful history. And I have not yet had the privilege to do that. One day I hope to take my family and experience that. But in some of my reading and digging, you see things, early references as early as 1766 in diary entries from, say, Joseph Banks, an English naturalist. We see this intrigue with these insects and fisheries and water, and we see so much, even then, conservation beginning to happen. Dry fly fishing was really the thing, I guess, that drew a lot of people, and it is arguably, when I say the word purist, that is exactly what people go to. Extreme purist would be bamboo only, because that's kind of where some of our rods originated from. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that particular recording. But we see tenkara very much in the world of Japan. And that's really kind of cool, because you'll hear a lot of fly fishermen get uptight about tenkara. and make fun of it, but I'm just going to be honest. It's just kind of stupid to make fun of it, because it really is part of our heritage as fly fishermen. Especially in dabbing or high sticking, or even in some of the Euro nymphing, arguably some of the casting is very similar. Although a lot of it is exclusively dry fly fishing when it comes to it, but not all of it. We see development of fly rods, like I said, that we'll talk about some other time. And then we go from fly lines and so forth. We see history from silk and some raw materials to the to nylon that's wrapped in PVC now and so on. And fly reels didn't exist at one point. And it's just really interesting to dig in and to see so many of these things and so many people that were fly fishermen who promoted this sport in good ways. We see folks like the late Jimmy Carter, who was a big proponent of fly fishing, especially here in Pennsylvania, where he had visited often. And we see Joan Wolfe, who was a woman who tremendously promoted and continues to promote fly fishing through her schools and things of that sort, making, if you will, disciples of the Wolfe School of Fly Fishing. And it's a beautiful thing to see anything from the Pocono Mountains, where arguably some people will say that that's where fly fishing began in the States, to the Catskills. I think the argument is probably favorable for the Catskills, but we'll just let the fun of that hang out there. And as you're drinking beer or coffee with your buddies, you can argue that in a kind way with each other. But the history of fly fishing is really, in my opinion, it most likely is grounded originally in survival, right? It was a means to catch something for dinner for the family. But in that, and from that, it has become something of great depth. I think it has become, like I said earlier, an art. It has become a respect for nature and for beauty, for the synchronicity that the insect and the hydrology and the fish and the environment all have in some regard to each other, a means by which we can discover a system, if you will, to chase these fish. Because it's interesting, there are kind of primary principles that belong to fly fishing, right? We have to understand casting principles. We have to understand insect selection. We have to understand hydrology and how it works. We have to understand how a fish functions, lives, moves, and breathes. These things reveal to tragedy to some, but reward to others. They reveal to us the obstacles that we were up against when it comes to chasing these fish, successfully or not. It helps us find them. It helps us pursue them and hunt them. It helps us discover what they're eating, when they're eating, what size they're eating, and how they're eating, as far as in the column and so on and so forth. It's a beautiful sport to do. And I want to encourage you, it's a beautiful sport to investigate, to learn about, to get on the water with somebody who is better than you, or maybe just has an ability to instruct or to lead you in a more fruitful direction, is a really good way to put it. And appreciate, is a really good word that comes to mind when I'm discussing this and thinking about this right now. To appreciate the sport more comes in two forms. It comes by experiencing and discovering things. And I'll say something about that in a minute. And it comes from gathering knowledge and applying it and seeing it actually work. Maybe it's the knowledge of how to tie your own fly, how to drift that own fly, where to target that fly to and drift it properly, how to set that hook properly, fight that fish, and so on. There's a deep appreciation that comes with all of that. And do you need to do this, to be clear, to be a fly fisherman, to be a successful one? I would argue to be a very, very successful one, yes. The deeper your understanding and appreciation goes, the better of a fly fisher person you will be. 100%. I will argue that hands down. But to fly fish, period, do you need all of this? No. I encourage it. I encourage it the same way I do when I was a pastor. And the way I put it was, I'm not expecting everybody here to be a scholar, but I expect everybody to treat these things scholarly if you want to see the most fruit and to be the most well-rounded person and angler and, well, churchgoer, if you will, that you can be. So there's a litany of literature and lectures and online and videos, and I would tell you to start with the books. Don't like to read? That's okay. Read a paragraph a day. Learn to like to read, because there's nothing like it. You will never gather information and hold it to yourself better than reading. Watching a video is passive. Reading a book is immersive. Every fiber of your being is activated when you read a book. You're vegging out when you're watching a video. And I don't say that to discourage you completely from watching videos. I've got videos out there on our YouTube channel and are working on other ones. But I say that as encouragement in a means or to describe a means by which you can gather this information effectively and fruitfully. So I said I was going to say something about kind of discovering something. One of the funnest things for me personally for fly fishing is when I'm on the water and just hours and hours and hours and into it, when I'm trying to discover and I'm trying to learn and I'm trying to just have some fun, and you go through some motions and maybe you make a cast. You say, oh man, this is working. This is, you accidentally kind of discover something. And then later on you find out that it's either been in the literature or somebody else has got a name for it that's better than you. And you kind of like, oh, wow. Well, that's kind of cool because I didn't know about that information, but I did discover it. So sure, there's some confirmation bias in there. And I think that's, confirmation bias is not a bad thing as long as you know that it's confirmation bias. So that's exciting for me when I see that happen, when I discover a particular cast or maybe it's a way that I discovered where the fish are lying and why. I'm kind of like, I think that's why those fish are sitting there. And then you read some of the data from like How Trout See or What Trout Eat or something from Jason Randall, and you go, oh, wow, there's actual data to back this up. To me, that's really cool. It's very encouraging. It builds my confidence that I might know a little bit about what I'm doing. But nevertheless, I hope that in the process of listening to these listening to these recordings, that the history of fly fishing becomes part of your history, part of your culture, part of your experience in life, part of your legacy, if you will. And I don't mean just taking a rod and catching a fish. Most of you know what I mean by that. And if you don't, I'll explain it. Here's what I mean. I mean the moment that you either wake up one day and have this discovery that you have freedom to do something unrestricted, or you've planned this with a friend or by yourself to head to that stream, and only you know that stream and that part of that stream. Maybe it's even that fish that you were after before, and you've invested the time in you've got your flies tied, your gear is rigged, you've been practicing your casting in your backyard or maybe the local pond or something. You've got the car packed. You're double checking and triple checking everything because you don't want to drive 2 hours and go, oh crap, and realize that you've forgotten something vital. I just recently had a client who was excited. He had a 6-hour trip to get to us, and he packed a bunch of this stuff, and he was making fun of his buddy because he had one bag. His buddy had like 6. They get out here, get ready to get in the water, and he realizes he brought his wading boots, but not his waders. And we laughed about that a couple of times throughout the day, but it's a good example, right? You get excited and you're driven because you're not just picturing making that cast to that fish, but you're like, oh, are these insects going to be coming off? And, will that be the pool that these fish find themselves rising in that I can, catch these fish? Or maybe it's, you've been working on a particular cast, or right or left hand curve cast, or, a wiggle cast downstream presentation or something like that, or upstream presentation to a downstream fish, or these things are going through your head and you're giddy like a child, but you're also full of anticipation and trying to be alert while you're driving and not dozing off as you're driving. And you get to that stream and you get geared up and you walk down there and you just as I try to teach people, don't just get in the water. Look, observe, be present, see what the river is saying. What kind of flies do you see in the air? Are there any? Are there any fish rising? What's the water doing? Let's dip our toes in, but the first thing we should do after that observation point, what's the temperature? Have we read the stream gauges beforehand? And is that dictating to us what water we're fishing or how we're fishing or where we're fishing on that water? Do we have to select a different tributary? Maybe something that's not blown out as we've recently experienced. These are questions that, in a wonderful way, plague our thinking, our imagination before we ever hit the stream. And these are part of my history when it comes to fly fishing. These are things that I think about the first day I took my son on Spring Creek, on the infamous section up from, I guess it would be downstream from the Benner Spring, kind of in between Benner and Fisherman's Paradise. And we were working, trying not to get right over top of this fish, but wanting so badly for him to connect with his first wild fish. And sure enough, he catches a 4 or 6 inch little wild brown. And somewhere back in the data of the iPhone video or photo library, there's that picture. And he was talking with me the other day about it. It's like, Dad, where was that stream? I remember catching that first fish. And I honestly, guys and girls, I think he was only 7, 8, maybe something like that. He wasn't really all that old. I don't exactly remember. I remember the waders that he was in looked like they were going to swallow him. It was hilarious because buying kids waders is a waste of money. Just buy larger waders and have them grow into them, or cheap waders and have them grow into them or throw them out. But don't buy kids waders. They're as expensive as regular waders, and they're going to grow out them really fast. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about, right? As we mature and as time passes, man, getting out on that water, the lessons that it teaches you, the beauty of friendship and camaraderie. Maybe it's a sip of bourbon on the shore. Maybe it's, some good IPAs from, well, I'm not going to give a sponsorship, but from my favorite brewery in Williamsport, PA. That you're sitting with a group of people that you had just fished for the day, or you're anticipating the day that's coming up, that you're going to get on that water, and you're going to enjoy that experience and create your own history fly fishing together. We just had opening day of trout season this past Saturday, and for most people in the state of Pennsylvania, it was blown out and dangerous. There was nearly 0 people out fishing in relation to years past, and that stinks. Even Sunday it was so blown. We got an inch of rain. So where my wife and son and I went, we went because of 2 reasons. I knew the particular section of the stream wouldn't be blown out no matter what. And secondly, we went because we were already totally blown out down here. I mean, my wife was telling me she was reading something on Facebook about the water conditions here in Western Pennsylvania. And one person described them in a simple word, death. And she laughed about it because, well, they were probably right. Don't get in that water. It's dangerous. Not only can you not stand up and hold yourself there, but God only knows what's coming down through the stream that could take you out, sweep your leg, tuck you under a rock. But we have a tradition that we go camping and we try to invite people to come with us, sometimes successful, sometimes not. So we get there and we got this great hip camp up in, at a different place. If you're interested, let me know. You can shoot me an email or leave something in the comments, and I'm glad to chat with you about it. Great place. I'd love to recommend it offline. Nevertheless, we get up there, and guess what it starts to do? Beautiful day Friday, which was supposed to be the day I wanted to get there earlier, but that, how plans work. It doesn't happen. So we got there Friday evening, and about 7, 8 o'clock, it starts to rain. And then it rains, and it rains, and it rains, and we get almost an entire inch of rain. That's a lot. That's a lot of liquid coming out of the skies above. It impacted most of our fishing. So that day we did some other things, tinkered around, hung out. Couldn't even go outside really because the wind and the rain were so bad. Even under cover, it was soaking wet and cold. So we waited, and I'm staring at the weather the entire day. And finally, I see about a 4-hour break in the weather. And my wife is shopping. So I could not be more antsy. I can be more, not irritated, but just on edge, I guess, wanting her to hurry up, get out here so we can go. And we finally get to the top end of this trip, to this river, and sure enough, we could fish. And we get in and we fish for about, 2 or 3 hours from time we got started setting up to the time we get back out. And all three of us successfully had caught fish. And it was a beautiful time. My wife enjoyed herself. My son was excited because he hadn't fished in a while with me or at all. And he's like, oh, I was scared. I forgot how to do it. And sure enough, he was the first to catch a fish. And it was a really great time. I got to chat with a couple spin fishing people on the stream and got to see some kids coming in with their families. And that's the history that we want to make. That's the beauty of fly fishing, or really any fishing, if you're going to look at it just that way. But I'll tell you this last part of that and kind of end it with what my wife's thoughts were on it. So how we ended the day is that we were looking for a lot of fish because where we were, they were not releasing the water effectively because they didn't need to because there was so much flow downstream. So we were pretty low water and relatively clear conditions, actually, on the piece that we fished. So we had to use a different tactic than maybe we would have. We're not throwing big indicators out there to scare these fish. So we did a great dry dropper, and that functioned all day long. As a matter of fact, it came very important when we finally found a huge pod of like 50 fish. They were tucked up under the branches in this pretty large hole for this river. I believe it was right side of the stream. And they were tucked under the branches of this hemlock tree. And I'm looking in there with my glasses, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's all these fish in there. So I took the rig I had on right away, and I threw it in there, which had a mott fly on it. And guess what? Like the Red Sea, those things just parted. I'm like, well, they're not wanting that. So I start to think, and I'm like, well, they're sitting here. They're in relatively clear water. They are not moving around a lot. The water's not moving very fast. There's like a branch coming into the water that creates a V, and the main current that they're sitting in is coming right through that. So I see exactly my casting pass, like the places that I need to put good cast and drift. Funny part of it is I'm right-handed. They're on the left-hand side, heading upstream, the left-hand side of the stream facing upstream. And the only way to effectively get in there is to make casts that you only had about maximum of 3 foot of room before you're in a tree. And it was directly upstream. We could not stand on the further outstream, center stream, and cast in and drift it down through because we would be standing in a big giant hole or too far away to make a good cast. So thank God for a good frisbee cast or water load cast, because you could send those flies downstream and effectively slide that forearm forward to a flick of that wrist to a good hard stop. And as long as you're 180 degrees from where point A to point B, there's that 180 degree rule. We'll talk later about casting. You could poke those flies right where you wanted to. And because we were running a really long leader, it hit the water like a feather. That never affected them. And then we started to figure out the smaller the fly, the better, because they were rising to some things. And that was kind of interesting. And I'm like, well, there's nothing here right now. And occasionally I'd see a midge. And I'm like, well, we know that the number one biomass as far as aquatic insects in the water around the country, if not the world, are midges. I'm like, well, guess what I did? I left my midge box back in the van. But I had some flies that were in the 20s that were thin and narrow, and we figured it out. We started downsizing those flies to really small, thin flies. Every single cast we had to take. And one even took as soon as the dry dropper hit the water, we hooked a rainbow on a dry, got it to the net, which was exciting. And I was able to get my wife and son both to execute casts underneath there. And the cool part of it is we figured those things out together. Later on, I don't know if it was the drive home or the evening when we finally got home, my wife's like, overall, because it was our first time camping in our van, which many of you don't know about, but that's a whole nother story. This van that we're creating to allow us to make these memories and do some other things. We were rained out and cold anytime we stepped out of that van the whole weekend. We never got on each other's nerves, surprisingly. We all caught fish. We all enjoyed it. Nobody fell. And man, she just said, overall we had a great trip. It was a good time. And you could tell my son was still reflecting on it. It was just, he was happy. He's like, Dad, I'm just glad that I was able to catch fish. I thought I'd be really rusty. Friends, that is part of the history of fly fishing. That is part of what I'm trying to encourage you to promote, to create in your own world. Family Lines, we could call it, which is also a great organization that you should check out. I'm going to let you go with that one. Till the next time, keep your lines wet in the water. The fly's in the fish's mouth. And remember, it's not about the destination. It is the journey that makes us. I appreciate you guys.